trying to get a sense for who's in the room, so maybe a show of hands, who works in the federal government space? Oh, nice, quite a few. How about public sector, maybe local? Okay, education. I knew I had one, there's two. And everybody else is commercial? Awesome. Well, welcome. Let's see if I can get this clicker going. I'm Samantha Nangia, and I work for the Pentagon, for the Navy.
There's a human traffic jam out there.
Oh, is it? Do we need to give it another second?
It's ridiculous.
Anyway, I'm a self-described data nerd. If my Apple Watch has a day where it loses power and I forgot to charge it, I kind of freak out that I'm going to miss that day of the trend data on how many steps I took and how many calories I burned. I've always kind of been a data nerd. When I was growing up, I remember still when I was 10 or 11, my mom was a PhD candidate, and you know those dot matrix printers? She used to print all of her data off for the analysis for her PhD, and I would literally use a ruler and aggregate the columns. I cannot believe how far we've come, because it's not that long ago, right? If we think about this, we talked about the scale of the improvements over the last 25 years, it is mind-boggling. And you know, I went to college and thought that I wanted to be an environmental lawyer, and it was the height of the dot-com boom, and I loved computers and I loved the data, and so I went into comp sci instead, and as I traveled out of college, it was the dot-com bust pretty much immediately. And that was why I made my way into more of a B2B ERP implementations and data architecture around business systems and backend. That was in Washington, D.C., but in a commercial environment, which is sort of strange in Washington. It's getting more commercial now. There's a tech boom going on in the Capital Beltway region, but inevitably, as most people do, I found my way into federal consulting because you get to stay at home. And I did that for about a decade, and I made my way to the Navy, and I was doing that at the Navy for almost 13 years, helping them to establish the underlying business systems and to expose data and to do reporting, and I did that for 13 years, and then they hired me. And it's been kind of amazing. So for the last 3 years, I've been an actual federal civil servant, and I work for the Navy at the Pentagon for the Secretariat. And I'm going to help you understand a little bit more about what our team does there. So let me see if I can do this. So we all know who the Navy is, right? So, there we go. You guys probably saw some ships and sailors, some pretty cool guns in that video. But our office, we see something a little different. So that's the USS Harper's Ferry. That first showed up in the Navy's 5-year plan in FY 78. That was before the majority of you in this room were born, I think. It is still in operations. The first lead ship was by Lockheed Shipbuilding in Seattle, which I'm not sure that even exists any longer, and that was for $238 million in FY 81. And then the Harper's Ferry itself was built right here in New Orleans, and that was delivered in FY 93. The ship on the right there is a MSC fleet replenishment oil, and we just had an FY 16 contract where we're replacing with a new set of those ships for $6.3 billion. All of the hardware that you see integrated onto the ship gets replaced and replenished with the phased maintenance availability contracts. And you can see up there we had one with General Dynamics and another with BAE Systems. And those are to the tune of $24 and $626 million each. The really cool missile launcher is being replaced as well at $142 million by Raytheon. And then you see this Sikorsky MH-60S Seahawk landing on the deck, all the way down to this guy's headset, which I was able to find the small business supplier that provided that headset in the NSN out of Clearwater, Florida for $658.90. All of that equipment and systems and supplies are in the purview of our office to report on and have visibility into for many, many people. In FY 17, the Department of Navy obligated on those systems and supplies over $109 billion in support of the weapon systems platforms and supplies and services for the men and women of the Navy. And that amounted to about $370 billion over the last 4 years. And you can see across the country how that is concentrated and spent. To put that in perspective, if you look at it from each of the agencies, all the federal agencies, not grouping us into the Department of Defense, but standing on our own, we are the largest agency across the entire federal government. And the spend that we have in annual is almost equivalent to the annual revenue of Google and Amazon. In fact, Google just made $100 billion in revenue this year. However you look at it, it's a lot of money and a lot of eyes on it. And so where do we fit in? This is the overall structure of the DoD. You all know that guy on the top. We actually procure that helicopter as well at the Navy. You can see we have the operational commands and the Joint Chief of Staff, and then we also have the MILDEPs. And even though we are at SecNav, the MILDEP, we are primarily an administrative office. Excuse me, I had another slide before. And it's always in a little bit of a conflict of the operational commands versus the administrative offices that have to get the business done and procure the systems that will allow us to get the mission accomplished. And of course, there's Congress and the American people. We operate because we get the appropriations out of Congress every year. We actually got the NDA signed into law prior to FY 19 this year, which is kind of amazing. I will give them that. But there are a lot of laws and rules that govern how we're able to do the buying that we do. We also have the audit arm of Congress, which is GAO, that has a lot of eyes on us, making sure that we're doing it in the appropriate manner in the way that they suggest. The FFATA and the Data Act are huge laws that require us to have detailed reporting now down to the financial and procurement level where we can trace and connect the budgets that are approved by Congress and how we actually execute them on programs within not only the DoD, but the whole federal government. And all of that data is now being aggregated into usaspending.gov. So for all of you data enthusiasts, you could actually go and get some of these sets yourself and start doing visualizations on the country spend in federal dollars. So where are we? We're under SecNav, and then my boss is this guy, Mr. Gertz, Hondo, as we call him. And then here we are, this is his organization, and you can see us all the way down here at the bottom, acquisition and procurement. And it's interesting because we're also all the way down in the basement of the Pentagon. And although we're a small office buried in the basement, our mission is large, and as you can see, the Navy's mission is to maintain, train, and equip combat-ready naval forces. And what we do at DASN RDA is to provide those weapon systems and platforms to the men and women, make sure that we're procuring them in time, make sure we're delivering them so that they can be used when the time comes. And then in DASN AP, we shape the acquisition policies and procedures, which really means we're red tape bureaucrats that make a lot of policies. But we also are required to answer a lot of questions. And so who are we now that we've gotten down to the basement and now we're in that organization? We are e-business. We're the custodians of the systems that support that naval business mission. So we act as the trusted agent to all the HCAs that have their operational missions and needs in terms of what they need to go buy. We're supporting them with the tools and the products and the systems and the readiness they need to get that job done. And we have a vision, and that is to be in a more data-driven environment and data-driven decision-making, analysis and immediate answers to our questions, which we don't have today, and I'll get a little more into why as we get along here. And I don't need to go into this, but this is our core responsibilities in that team, and to be honest, it's really just a team of 4 government individuals, and then we have our support staff. So we're a small team, but that timely acquisition and procurement data analysis is really the main focus of what I'm presenting today. So data demands. So you saw that whole organization structure that I just described above us, and they put a lot of weight onto the procurement staff in the basement to answer questions. How did you buy it? Did you do it within the rules and regulations? Did it have the appropriate clauses? Did you procure enough out of small businesses? Did you use competition enough? Was it in the congressional districts that we care about? Did you have any conflicts of interest? Was the vendor, did the vendor, was he able to do business? Did you structure the contracts within the compliance of the rules and regulations of the FAR and the DFARS? So many questions that come from every single different direction onto a staff of 4. And we have to extract those answers out of this environment. This is the DoD business system environment as somebody tried to depict from IBM years ago and failed miserably. And I like to joke, earlier they talked about how we invented the internet at DoD. We also invented silos. And you can see them clearly in the architecture. This is just the Navy's portion of that and then blown out. And really this is more simplistic than it actually is, because we're aggregating across what ends up being 52 to 80 back-end databases across that orange row, and probably 25 to 30 different middleware products and layers in order to get the data out. It's complicated to manage and even more complicated to expose data. Yep. So Tableau. So we have 2 primary data objectives to meet those needs that I just described. And the first is, how do we get our data demanders answers faster? SecNav, Congress, the president, our HCAs, everyone. How do we get you answers immediately when you ask for them? And then how do we get a more real-time pulse on the health of that underlying architecture? Because it is complex and it's complicated, and we have so many varying silos of information, as well as teams that are managing it from an admin perspective. It's hard to know, where are we right now? How much data is flowing? Is it flowing where it needs to go? Because when we have holes in our data, we have holes in our understanding. All right, does anybody have a 4 to 9-year-old or 10? Yeah, some of you. Yeah, see, it's because you were not born before 1978. So we have a new 4-letter word in our house that we have to have them not use, and that's noob. So if you play any Minecraft or Fortnite, if you're a noob, then you just might as well not play. So that was us before we got Tableau. We had all these disparate data sources with multiple methods that we got the data extracted out, including SQL queries, where I would call someone on the phone and be like, we got this request where we need to know this pieces of information. I'm going to need these 10 data elements. Can you put them in a SQL query, draw it out of your database, and then send it to me in an email? Literally happened when I first started at the Navy. And then we would aggregate that information into tables into Excel and use formulas to standardize on the fields and then make pivots. You all know this because it was your history. You did this for years. And then every time a new data request came in, we had to do it again. Time-consuming, labor-intensive, no centralized authoritative source of information, and literally we met the capacity of Excel. We could no longer generate the pivot tables. We had too many rows of data. We weren't able to do any trends, and we'd have to start dumping data off from the history and archive. We also had some loaded points of failure. You've all built the data model in Excel that nobody else knew or understood, right? You were the only one on the team. They literally said if you walked down the hallway and the file cabinet opened and it hit your head, it was over. The boss was never getting the report, and that actually happened to us. It's because somebody went on leave for an extended amount of time, and we could not generate the reports any longer for OSD, who was then having to report it to Congress. We eventually got there. We just had to redo it ourselves. So it's just another depiction of all the different data sources that we're pulling information out into that Uber Excel environment. All right, the next level after noob is a pro. So you're all right. You can play Fortnite on occasion. Once you're a pro, you don't have to be kicked out of the club. So we automated those data extracts, and we put them into Postgres in an open source data environment, so that we would, open source being the product that we use, not open source so you can't get to the data. You get it. And then we exposed all of that information into Tableau. So now what does this give us? What are we doing once we get to that point? We now have a centralized authoritative source of the data. There's no longer, oh, is it on Jimmy's machine, or is it in Sally's computer, or is it on the shared drive somewhere? Which version was the right version? Am I using the most current set? Now we have one place where the answers are stored, and we have the underlying data that then is exposed in whatever way we need to expose it. And I know this is the story of Tableau. I'm telling the same story that everybody's heard before, but every time it's remarkable, because it's amazing to us how long it would take us to aggregate those reports and to get any meaningful information out. And really, at the end of the day, it wasn't that exciting once you finally got to the answer, but it was a ton of work. The large data sets process more quickly, and we have less manual intervention and potential for errors. This is the biggest piece. We can now turn around a dashboard. Here it says in hours or less versus days. It was taking us 7 to 10 days to respond to some data calls. We can now provide answers in 10 minutes, but we usually wait about 3 hours just to lower expectations. So here's just another visualization of getting all that data extracted out and then putting it into the Postgres and then having the server visualize that information immediately. And it sometimes surprised me how the data load dates, because I know when they go in, that I go in and I get the visualization and it's new. I'm still startled and excited every time. So DoD is a little unique from commercial businesses because we have to share data. You must. It's the law, you shall, written in. And there's a multitude of federal and public partners that we have to get the data to flow to. And that we personally at DASN AP, under our DASN RDA, are responsible for making sure that data gets there. From an audit perspective, we are in charge of the contract vendor pay segment of the audit that we have going on at the DoD, which is a huge endeavor. We have to make sure the data is getting where it needs to go. And the data matters out of the contract writing systems. That is obligating the government to expend those funds and then accept the receipt of the products and pay. So here enters our number 2 use for Tableau, and that's to look at the transactional dashboards to see what the health of the underlying architecture is, how well are we doing to meet that mission of getting all of the data where it needs to go accurately 100% of the time. Not to mention that if your data is not extracting out and getting to where it needs to go, then you have an incomplete picture of the current state of affairs. So again, as a reminder, this was the Navy architecture. So we have all of these sources of information, and then we have all of these cups to fill. That's what I'm trying to depict with this picture. But all of those cups are the Congress and the DASN accounting systems and reporting systems. And you would think you'd have a one-to-one. You have your integration layer, and if you're in a commercial business, you would never even consider seeing numbers like this where you sent something out of your source system and 11% of the time it makes it to the target system. That would be insane. You would be fired. Maybe I should be, but no. But those target systems that we're going to, some of those are mainframes from the 60s, and they have very specific data requirements and targets you have to meet in order for the data to flow electronically. The data gets there, it just doesn't get there electronically. So that's what these numbers are showing. So we needed a mechanism where we could start monitoring that more proactively. So we know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know. What I mean by that is when we see the transactions come out, we can flow them through and watch them get to each of those source systems, and then we can come in and we can do some intervention to make sure that the transaction gets there manually if it didn't receipt electronically. But we don't know what we don't know. We don't know when the transactions are not raising their hands. So we don't know when a transaction from those 52 databases doesn't make it out of the extractor and then flow through to the next step of the gate, because there's no visibility into that underlying back-end transaction set, because what we're monitoring is the flow out. So this is where we started to look at how could we try to assess, based on transactional expectations that we have day to day, whether or not all the transactions from a single source made it out of that complex architecture. These are the Pac-Man ghosts. They are the missing transactions. So enter KNIME Analytics. We took years worth of the transactional information that we had archival of that we're now able to store in Postgres, we're not able to store in our Excel, and we feed them into KNIME algorithms. We know that our transactions vary from day to day from every source in every office because our operations vary from day to day, and the way that we get funds across a year varies. So you will have a big spike in September, as most people that are in acquisition and procurement know, when you have to obligate those funds for the end of that fiscal year before you start the next. So you can't just look at the ebbs and flows of the transactions coming out and make assumptions based on that. If you were looking at a more operational view in a warehouse, you would have a set expectation of how many transactions you were expecting in a day, but we don't have that. So we have to train a model to look back over time to say, how many transactions do I expect based on the fact that today is Saturday and this office is San Diego and this is what this Saturday across the last 10 years looked like for that office in San Diego? Is that in expectation of what I would have from a predictive analytics perspective or not? And so KNIME, the Pac-Man, is finding those ghost transactions to say, what's the probability that today's observation is anomalous per officer database? How far off are you from what we expected to see from that data flow coming out of the source systems? Oh, did I skip a slide? I did. So I think this is pretty neat because transactional dashboards like this, you could look across them. This is, and just to point out, what we're looking at is we have the first gate, the second gate, and the third gate of the transaction sets as we expect them to go through to each of our destination systems. And you can see by your eye looking at the pattern that it doesn't make a lot of sense. It should be a similar pattern, but it's harder to tell a computer to look for those anomalies. But with the KNIME modeling and the cognitive algorithm, you can get KNIME to start thinking like you do and to see those patterns and be able to see when there is an anomaly. So this is how we go through that process to get it into the model and then eventually get it out into a visualization that we can use for interpretation evaluation. So the first point is our normal data cleansing that everybody goes through and transformation that gets us into our standard data set. We then feed that standard data with years worth of length of information and depth in order for it to start looking at the patterns, finding them, and then seeing when something's anomalous. And we then output that into a TDE file that we can then immediately distribute through the server for people that are going to have to make the decision on whether or not that requires an action on their part. I think I'm jumping ahead, that's this one, yep. Packaged together with the dashboards that will allow them to drill in and figure out the why. Why did it fail? What were some of the other components within the day to give them enough information to take action if necessary. So we store the contract data. We then feed it into the KNIME process, again, pulling that historical data to build the model, run the latest data against the model to find anomalies, and then export that out as a TDE file, and then distribute it directly to those that need it to take action. This process is part of a larger acquisition data framework that we're building. And I'm pretty excited because this has been 3 years in the making, and we're finally at a point where we've built the data model in order to integrate disparate sources of information together, which is no small feat. It sounds simple when you think of it as transactional information and having identifiers that could easily be flowed through, but that's not how the DoD works. Our data is not standard at all and requires a lot of transformation in order to be looking across different data sets and then finding the same transaction in each one in order to add that detail onto the reporting and understanding that you're making within the analytics. And that took us forever to build that model, and now we have it and we're automating the pulls from those data sources into an integrated environment with adapters and workflows, getting it into one source of truth, which can then be reused across not only all of our applications for visualization, which we're definitely using for Tableau, but also into our toolkit applications, which allow us to reuse the same information within multiple applications. So this toolkit apps are made up of Java applications that we then expose and provide to our users across the HCAs, and it's using the same source of truth, one source of truth within our data repository. And we're just at the beginning, so I can't wait to see what we're gonna be able to do from here on now that we've established that, because that was the dirty work. It's hard, it's not that exciting because you don't have the output as you're trying to build the model and integrate all the data together. And so we're finally there, and I'm pretty excited about where that's gonna go. And again, everybody knows why Tableau is awesome, but I just want to reiterate that it's really where it shines, because once you get the data all connected and interlinked underneath, you then are able to have views for everyone in the organization, from the top all the way down to the working operational level, but it's the same underlying structure. You're not creating a different data set for each use. You're just exposing it in the different ways that you need. And so that brings me into this, which is not a Navy visualization. I just want to, I know I mentioned earlier in the speech that I wanted to be an environmental lawyer. I do have some interest in the environment, and this was the Tableau visualization for me that has had the most impact on me, that I always remember it, because it was my aha moment. And I know that there's something called Makeover Mondays at Tableau, and I saw that there was a makeover for this one. Let's see if I can. Yes. So these are the global temperature anomalies from NORM since 1896. Is it running? You can do it. There we go. I was going to say a word before. This takes a little bit, but my point is data visualization brings so much more clarity and meaning, right? It's quite the makeover. Because temperatures, they go up and down. We've always had cold years. We've always had hot years. Yeah, wow, the sun is burning. Got it, Jess. So how do we use data visualization at the Navy? So this was before. Yes. No. So these were the pivots off of those underlying flat Excel tables. This is what we were doing only 2 years ago to show the same data that we now present in this way, with a lot more meaning. And what is awesome is now you see the top line metrics, but you can see the little clicky finger. You can now interact with the dashboard immediately and find out what matters to you. So this is a great view for our level, because we want to see across the entire Navy organization how we're doing in these metrics, understanding why we have failed transactions. You can see there again the health and quality of our data. But then it allows NavC in this instance to drill in and see, well, what did you do and what were your top line errors that you have from a data perspective that are causing failure downstream or are not in compliance with laws, rules, regulations. The other great thing, as I talked about our integrated data environment and on top of that application framework, is this information is coming out of one of our applications. So that data is then immediately being exposed through Tableau for real-time action and understanding. So we have an application that goes and sits on those 52 databases, and it does analysis of the quality of the information that you have within. You then run the validation, and then the data is exposed here to say, hey, here's the issues that you have with that data. When you push go and execute and that data comes out, you have a high probability of failure as you try to go to your downstream systems. And then this allows them to immediately interact with that data information and take steps to make changes. Here's another pre-Tableau visualization that are the top line metrics of how they're doing on that same goal. And then this was where we evolved to using Tableau. And again, allowing us to, and again, this is from the customer perspective, it allows me to interact immediately. And then when I have a question, I used to be in a meeting and I would have our visualization team or metrics team there, and I'd say, well, why? Why did they have this drop in their % sent on that day in August? And they'd say, oh, well, we'll have to get back to you, and I'll come back, take the note, and I'll go and I'll analyze the data, and then I'll give you the answer. And now you can just click directly into there, extract out, and then have the information that helps you understand, oh, I see it was this database that failed on that day. I see 0 transactions, or it was this server that wasn't working, and we need to go back and figure out why. Here's another way of looking at that same top-line metric. And this allows us to see in aggregate how well we're doing, because there's so many wickets you have to go through to get to quality data and output. It just allows us to quickly see that across a command and then understand which office is pulling them back. So in this instance, you can see our first command, it was one single office that was kind of throwing their metric into the dark ages. Again, a pre-one. This is telling us how much competition we're using across different organizations. And then this is taking what was, am I going too fast? This is taking what had been 4 tabs worth of information and data that you would have to scroll through in order to try to understand, and it depicts it in one page. And what's awesome about this as well is you can then click into each of these. You can click anywhere you want on the screen, and then it will update the rest of the views with the information that you're filtering it down to. Again, this is our top line aggregates. You saw a sneak peek of this dashboard earlier in the presentation, but it's just showing us who we do the most business with. I know we have General Dynamics and Boeing in the room. Doing well. Oh wait, and Northrop Grumman, right? Yeah. And then finally, this is a great example of how you can use dashboards not in a static way or for just executive reporting, but to operationally. So this is telling us what are the things that we expect to be coming up for renewal in the next 3 months. And you can drill in by portfolio and all the way into product class and code to understand all of the different contracts that are coming up, so that you could see if there's opportunities for consolidation or to intervene in terms of the use of preferred IDIQs, vehicles that provide the best rates. It allows executives to take a look at that from a very global perspective and try to group like buys and get better value for the government. And then in terms of our predictive dashboards, we're still just getting started to try to understand how we can continue to use KNIME not only in the capacity of operations to look at the health of our transaction flows, but to also look at it from the perspective of how we can do better for the Navy from a business perspective and on-time payments, as well as to get from solicitation to award faster, because that's what they're always looking for us to do. How can we get the things we need faster, better, more efficiently, and expeditiously? All right, it was kind of fast. I did want to take the opportunity to introduce my really kick-ass team, because I know that's a cliche that everybody says that you're only as good as your team, but in this case, it's really, really true. So we have a unique arrangement because we have a small business that is our engineering lead team that does all of the underlying database and that application development. as well as managing the server environment and making sure it's always working and up. And then we have an analytics team at Accenture who sits at the office with us and understands our business and help build the underlying business model, the data model, to make it all work and pull together. So it's been really great. And they're here in the front row, so are there? Thank you. Are there any questions? Yeah.
So first of all, amazing, really awesome design for a lot of those dashboards. So thanks for sharing those with us. As you've helped your stakeholders get more comfortable moving off of traditional stoplight views, traditional charts, and introduce new concepts like bullet graphs, new color schemes, and dot plots, what have some of those conversations been like for you, and what's been most effective in helping people evolve so we can?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I often have that line that I also have to hurdle, because although I'm the government now and the customer, we really, as DASN AP, especially in e-business, are also consulting to the rest of the office and the Navy to give them the information that they want and need in the way that they see it. And I do think we've had some head-scratching conversations with our execs where they're like, we're just not sure if we see it. and I think that especially in the DoD, it's a little hard to get people out of their comfort zone. What's been interesting is the visualizations, we can always tweak those, and so easily that you can keep iterating through those, and that's really what we've done to get buy-in. But it's the trust of the underlying data that has been our biggest obstacle, because we have an office where everybody has been answering these questions off of the sources, and to have one source of truth has been something that we've been working on really hard over the last 2 years to try to get everybody to understand, you must go here. This is where the answer is now. We don't want to have all these disparate data sets. Yeah.
What are your metrics of success, and can you provide a couple of examples of what people have done with the data and what the impact has been?
Yeah, so especially those operational metrics have been really successful for us over the last 2 to 3 years, and that is to say, what is the health of the data that's coming out? And I think it was eye-opening for a lot of the offices, especially the leads. They didn't realize that there was so little data getting to the destination, and it was shocking to them. So if you measure it, it will happen. So we started measuring that, and we've seen real improvement. That's been the biggest hurdle that we had, was to get that real rich data. We are fortunate because working at the DoD, you do have chain of command, and then we have OSD who's been championing to get a more robust underlying contract data structure where you can render the entire agreement off of XML data, as opposed to having just the index information or a small amount of the XML capturing that. You can render the entire agreement off of data. And so now the next challenge will be, how do you then use data that's not well structured when it's a little squishy from the perspective of contract agreements? But I think that's where we've seen the biggest impact so far. These dashboards I was showing towards the end for the executives to just better understand where we're going in the next 3 months, that 3-month forward look, we're still trying to get some adoption of that, trying to grow some momentum to get people to kind of shift their mindset towards using the information in that sort of way. Yep.
So your office has fully transitioned over to Tableau. I'm assuming sometimes you also get requests from public to get data yourself off the dashboard. What is your office?
So we usually get requests from the offices to build the dashboard or to run it for their specific look, as opposed to asking for a dump of all of the data so that they can do something with it. And we are the best that we can within the operational tempo that we have from our own demands, because we're a small team. We try to help them, and what we're looking to do in the next year to 2 is to let them come into the Tableau environment and then pull those answers themselves and start to build dashboards, or we'll build some standard dashboards they can then drill into their commands. That's what our next step is. Yes?
So I'm seeing the procurement and middleware, kind of this data aggregation initiative that you guys, and the US Comptroller and Don and Mark are
all separately, yes.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering, within your group, if you guys have a discussion about kind of the opportunity cost of coding the ETL processes or procuring this middleware versus changing your underlying system architecture, and what kind of led you down this path?
Okay, it's a loaded question. So I will say we try not to redo work that's already been done. So there's a good example of that PDS XML. It's such an opportunity for us to be able to extract that full contract data and start doing analytics on it. OSD is already building that. So we are sitting and waiting. We didn't embark to say, well, we want to do this, so we're just going to start doing it right now. So we're waiting to see what they build and see if we can just reuse it and then just have a service into their data source and refresh it nightly. It might not work. There's been times where OSD hasn't delivered, right? So if it doesn't work, then we will consider building it ourselves. But we definitely try to go out and see, well, has this ever been done before? There are already things that are being done. In terms of changing the underlying architecture as opposed to doing a bunch of transformation, that is so hard in the environment that we're in at DoD. And we have an enormous effort underway to really revolutionize how we do procurement at the Navy. But every single time we turn around, we're met with barriers to getting there right now. So we're so close to the finish line. So I hope that happens because Misan will tell you I'm such an optimist. I don't know, every year I get worse. It just like keeps on weighing on me. But once we get there, it'll be a whole new world of data, and I love data analysis, so I just can't wait till we actually have the whole end-to-end procurement process digitized, and then it will really be endless in terms of what we can do. Will we get there? I sure hope so, and then I hope that we get there for all of DoD, because that will be where we'll get the true value, is if we're all in one, and that's where we were trying to get with PDS at least, but it's after the fact. Yep.
So if you would have to sell this idea all over again to your procurement organization, who I frequently talk to in various agencies, what would be that 30-second sales pitch that you would give them on why do they want this? We know, but I'm wondering from sort of your perspective, what really moves the needle?
I just think that 7 to 10 day turnaround on what should be very simple data calls was our biggest momentum to be able to say, you just need one source of truth and then different views into that truth. It's just so much rework. I think that from the procurement, go ahead.
Does that translate to a quicker award decision?
I see what you're saying, sure.
So from a business perspective, when you talk to your executives, I think everybody kind of listens to different things when this conversation goes on. And I'm wondering, what was it that...
So the thing that convinced our organization and why what you saw, a lot of what I was talking about, is that operational underlying data quality and transmission is because it was audit. Our information was not getting from procurement to the accounting systems consistently, and we had no visibility into what was or was not making it. And so that is providing us with the transactional dashboards that help to understand how much of our data is getting obligated within the accounting system so that we have it all traced back and it can be audited. Yes?
Are you working with the other branches of the military at the Pentagon to actually, lessons learned that you have, apply it to their procurement team? I know when, many years ago, when I was an intelligence analyst, we were so siloed in our focus of getting our data for our mission, and yet when we would have these think tanks together, we would work with the other agencies to, we're doing this, we're going to look at it this way.
Yeah.
We end up becoming a collective effort. I was just wondering if you're sharing that.
Yes, so there are many different ways that we're doing that at the DoD, and I will say sometimes even our integrated working groups are siloed. But we do have a DoD data management team, and then we echoed that at the Navy, where we have everybody come together once a month across all the commands to talk about data issues that we're having. In terms of lessons learned, I do note that there's many of these BI capabilities are growing up in tandem. And we do need to have a bigger conversation at the DoD and at the DAN about what that looks like as we go forward, because it's always going to be a need, and we need to understand how to support that and make sure that we're all learning from each other, as you're saying, and using this. Yes?
As a DoD organization, do you have difficulty keeping up with the pace of the product cycle of Tableau? Because
Yeah.
doing it on,
Yes.
like, is that getting better, or is it just kind of just the drugs?
So before the presentation, I was talking a little bit about how much of our Tableau environment is still prototype because of that very problem. So our integrated application framework that we're talking about, we do have that on an AV network. It's running there. We have the analytics that I was talking about where we do the validation of our information is all within NOLA right here in New Orleans.
What version? Like,
Right, but Tableau, we haven't been able to integrate that into the NMCI network because of those issues. So we're still working on that. We're leveraging it for what we can now, and then but we would like to get it into that operational footprint. And it's the IA issues right now are immense with RMF and trying to get through those workflows. It really is stifling innovation. Yeah. Yes. Go.
So we're part of the Navy organization, we work from the NAVAIR side of the house.
Okay.
I'll give you my card afterwards. We've actually got all of our capital stuff from 10.5
Nice.
deployed in production through NMCI.
And 10.5 is approved on an MCI.
Yeah, we did all
Very
the data.
bravo, Zulu. Thank you.
About 6 months ago.
Very good.
So I'll stop by afterwards
Okay.
and get all of our contact stuff.
Yes, please do.
That was also being tested. They're estimating 6 months until it's NSX standard.
Great. Yes.
I'm curious, I remember you said before Tableau, it takes you like 7 to 10 days for the ad hoc report.
Yes.
I'm kind of curious, is that because the complexity of the data or the accuracy of the data?
It was waiting for extract of the data.
Oh,
Yeah.
and do you have an issue, do you face a like serious issue of the accuracy?
We
Typo?
Yes. There are so many things that we cannot correlate and report because of those quality issues. And that's really why, for us, the BI exposure and visualization of the underlying data layer was not as valuable to us as some of these applications that we built first, which is to pre-validate the information that is being exposed. So that pre-validation capability, getting into the user's hands and saying, hey, here are the mistakes that you made in data entry. Please correct them before you send this information to the rest of the world for consumption.
You still don't have like a quick, easy way.
No quick and easy tricks for especially because so much, as I was saying, of the contract data is squishy. And I always say I'm a very black and white, having been comp sci, I like things to be concrete. And in the business environment, and especially when you're looking at contract agreements, which half of them are just, words to say you shall do this and you shall do that. It's not even in any kind of structured information. And so, yeah, we don't have any tips or tricks right now, but I look to engineers to do semantic. Go ahead.
I was curious too, I saw you're using Postgres. Are you using PostGIS extension as well?
Going over here for that one.
Because it's just an extension you turn on, and it gives you geospatial capabilities. And there's a lot of things besides mapping you can use it for. Like, for example, if you turn, it's very easy to turn an address into a GPS coordinate, and then you can easily see whether it's inside of an AOR, a congressional district, and stuff
Yeah.
without any kind of data entry. And you can also use it to do simple queries to sort of auto-node data things.
Interesting. Yeah, we'll have to play with that. Yes. So, David, document development. Yeah, we do use Redmine, which is an open source project management tool. And that's how we do the development cycles. But you guys also use Slack, right? Okay. To do the documentation. So what he said was that he uses the wiki component of that Redmine application, which they tailored for their suite of portfolio systems that they developed. Yep.
Are there any special cyber considerations working in Tableau?
Special cyber considerations.
In the same cyber situations you have with anything. It's where you deploy it, it's the footprint, it's the ports you have open, because you have access. Same with everything.
Are you guys working in cyber?
No.
No.
Are you aggregating data?
No, our data aggregation is not at the, for this procurement data within the prototype, is not at a level where the aggregation would be of a risk level. Any other questions? Yes?
Would it be possible to get these slides?
I think that the slides will all be distributed. Yeah. All right, thank you.